The snow started falling at 10:42 p.m. Thick and relentless, the kind that swallows headlights and silences the city block by block. Eleanor Whitmore stood alone in the executive parking garage beneath the Meridian Capitol Tower, her breath fogging the frozen air, her phone screen casting pale light across her face. The message had arrived 11 minutes ago. 14 words that could unravel 8 years of work. Quorum confirmed. Vote rescheduled to 8 a.m. Thursday. Aspen Ridge. Be there or concede. She stared at the words until they blurred. Aspen Ridge was 400 miles away through a mountain pass that closed without warning when storms like this one moved through. Her town car service had already called to cancel. The airport had suspended all departures until morning. A concession, her attorney had explained calmly on the phone, would be treated as consent. The Harmon Group would complete the acquisition before she could file a single injunction. She had built Meridian from a 2-person consultancy in a shared office space in Wicker Park. She had survived a hostile partner split in year 3, a near bankruptcy in year 5, and a federal audit that cost her 18 months of sleep. She had done it without a safety net, without inherited capital, without a single person who said she couldn't fail because she wasn't the kind of person failure touched. She had done it with her hands and her mind, and a stubbornness her mother had always called her worst quality. She was not going to give it away to a real estate conglomerate from Phoenix because of a snowstorm. Eleanor walked out of the garage into the open air, where the snow hit her immediately, cold and wet against her cheekbones. She opened the independent driver app she kept on her phone for emergencies. Most listings had already gone dark. Then one appeared, time-stamped 4 minutes ago. Daniel Marsh. Ford Explorer. Snow tires, winter emergency kit. Available now, $950 flat rate. Aspen Ridge, 3 days. She called. He answered on the second ring. This is Daniel. His voice was even. Not the over-eager register of someone desperate for the fare. Not the casual indifference of someone who didn't care whether she called. Just steady, like a person who had already decided what the night was going to require of him and was at peace with it. I need to get to Aspen Ridge by 7:30 tomorrow morning, she said. The pass may close. I need someone who won't turn around. A pause. Short. Considering. I won't turn around, he said. Where are you? The Ford Explorer arrived in 9 minutes. It was not a luxury vehicle. The exterior had the scuffs and salt stains of a working car in a Chicago winter. But when Eleanor pulled the passenger door open, she noticed the tire's immediately aggressive tread, heavy sidewall, the kind that grabbed ice rather than sliding across it. The back seat had been cleared. A thermos sat in the center console holder, still steaming. A folded wool blanket occupied the seat beside her. Daniel Marsh was 36 or 37, she guessed. Square jaw, a day or two of dark stubble, a canvas jacket that had clearly spent time outdoors. He glanced at her bag as she settled in, then at the road ahead. Highway or state route? He asked. You're the driver. State route adds 40 minutes in clear weather. Shaves 2 mountain interchanges. In this storm, it's the safer call. Then, state route. He nodded and pulled into traffic without another word. Eleanor opened her laptop and spent the first 2 hours working. Shareholder agreements, proxy vote mechanics. The specific language in the Meridian bylaws that her attorney believed could be challenged if the rescheduling notice had been sent without proper board authorization. She annotated documents. She sent encrypted messages to 2 attorneys in different time zones. She ignored the snow. She was aware of him at the edges of her attention. The way he drove deliberate, unhurried, reading the road rather than fighting it. When a semi jackknifed ahead of them on the interstate, he slowed without drama, found a service road exit, navigated 3 miles of unplowed county asphalt without complaint, and returned to the route without comment. When she asked him the revised ETA, he gave her a precise answer. At 2 in the morning, somewhere past the Illinois border, Eleanor Whitmore closed her laptop and fell asleep against the window. She hadn't planned to. She hadn't slept in a moving vehicle since she was a child, but the rhythm of the wipers and the heat coming through the vents and the particular quality of Daniel's silence, the kind that didn't demand anything from her, pulled her under before she knew it was happening. She woke to stillness. The car was parked. Through the windshield, the world was white, a rest area at the foot of a mountain pass. The kind of place that existed for truckers and travelers who had driven too long. Snow had accumulated on the hood. The engine was off, but the heat was still running on battery. Warm and quiet. Daniel was not in the car. Eleanor straightened, located her phone, 6:14 a.m. 2 hours to the meeting, and pushed the door open. The cold hit her with full force. She was underdressed for mountain winter. She'd left Chicago in a cashmere coat appropriate for a city morning. Daniel was standing near the front of the truck, a thermos in one hand, studying the pass road above them where a state highway truck was running a salt spreader. He turned when he heard her door. "Pass opened at 5:45, he said. "We're 40 minutes out. You have time." He handed her the thermos. The coffee was black and very strong. She wrapped both hands around it. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Some." She looked at him. He had the look of a person who had spent a lot of nights not sleeping and had stopped feeling the need to account for it. He opened the back hatch and produced a paper bag, 2 egg and cheese sandwiches from a truck stop diner, wrapped in foil and still warm. "I didn't know what you'd want," he said. They only had 2 options. She took one without ceremony and ate it, standing in the snow, looking at the same mountain he'd been watching. It was the first thing she'd eaten since lunch the previous day. That was when she noticed the photograph. It was clipped to his sun visor, a small print, slightly creased at the corner. A girl, maybe 7 years old, mid-laugh, a gap where one front tooth should have been, arms thrown wide in what appeared to be someone's backyard, deep snow around her knees. "Your daughter?" He looked at the photo. Something shifted in his face, not sadness exactly, but a kind of quiet fullness. "Lily," he said. "She's 8 now. She lives with you?" "She lives with me." There was something in the way he said it. Not defensive. Not performing sacrifice. Just a fact that had become the structure of his life. "Her mother?" Eleanor asked, and then immediately wondered if she should have. He didn't seem to mind. 3 years ago, he said. Black ice. She was driving home from her sister's place. He looked back at the pass. February, actually. Same kind of night. Eleanor held the thermos in both hands and said nothing. There was nothing adequate to say. She had learned, from years of boardrooms and negotiations, that silence could be its own form of acknowledgement. After a moment, Daniel picked up the bags and the thermos. "We should move," he said. "You don't want to be late." The Aspen Ridge meeting was held in a conference center attached to a resort hotel, the kind of place designed to make financial decisions feel inevitable. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing snow-covered peaks, a long mahogany table, water glasses that were refilled before they were half empty. Eleanor had spent the drive up the mountain reviewing her final position. She had 4 committed votes. She needed 6 for a blocking minority. The 2 swing shareholders, a pension fund representative named Gerald Holt and an independent director named Constance Beaumont, had been non-committal through 3 rounds of outreach. She walked in at 7:48 a.m., exactly on time, in the same clothes she'd worn to the garage 14 hours ago. She had combed her hair in the hotel lobby bathroom and straightened her jacket. She looked, she knew, like someone who had driven through a blizzard rather than slept in a suite. She had decided, somewhere on the mountain, that this was an advantage. The meeting lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. Gerald Holt voted with the Harmon Group. She had expected that. Constance Beaumont abstained, citing what she called a procedural irregularity in the notice a half measure that delayed the vote but resolved nothing. By noon, the session had adjourned without a final resolution, and Eleanor's attorney was on the phone advising her to consider settlement terms. She walked out of the conference center into the cold. The sky had cleared. The mountains were sharp and white against a blue so bright it looked manufactured. She stood in the parking lot while the other attendees filed out around her, speaking in careful voices about dinner reservations and flight rescheduling. Daniel was parked exactly where she'd left him. He had moved the car into a space with a view of the exit, which meant he had been watching for her. When she came through the doors, he got out of the car and leaned against the hood without speaking. She walked to him and stopped a few feet away. "Not good," she said. He nodded once. "I have 3 days before they reconvene," she said. "Which means I'm not going home yet." "I figured," he said. He opened the passenger door. "Want to drive?" She did, actually. She hadn't driven anything more than a cab in 2 years, but something about the suggestion, the idea of putting her hands on something she could actually control, cut through the noise in her chest. "I don't know these roads," she said. "I'll navigate." He directed her 12 miles east of the resort, up a service road she would never have found on her own, to a pull-off at a ridgeline where the mountain dropped away into a valley so wide and still it looked like a painting. The snow on the valley floor was unbroken. Pines ran along the ridges in dark, even lines. A frozen creek caught the afternoon light somewhere below. Eleanor pulled the Explorer to a stop and cut the engine. They sat for a while without talking. "I used to think quiet was something you had to earn," she said eventually. "Work hard enough, solve enough problems, then you get to rest." She looked at the valley. "I'm not sure I've ever actually gotten there." "Some people aren't built for stopping," Daniel said, not unkindly. "My father was like that. He ran 3 businesses simultaneously for 30 years. When he retired, he didn't know what to do with himself." She paused. "He died 8 months after he stopped working. Heart attack. Entirely preventable." Daniel was watching the valley. "He ever tell you he was proud of you?" he asked. She laughed, short and dry. "Once. At my MBA graduation." He shook my hand. She shook her head. I spent the next 15 years trying to recreate the feeling of that handshake. The wind moved through the pines below. A hawk circled far out over the white floor of the valley. "Claire was the one who made me stop," Daniel said. "My wife, she used to say I was burning both ends of the rope." He exhaled slowly. "After she died, I thought maybe I should just finish burning it. What's the point of pacing yourself when the other person is already gone?" Eleanor turned to look at him. "What changed?" she asked. "Lily had a nightmare. About 3 weeks after the accident. She came into my room at 2 in the morning and she just stood there at the door. Didn't say anything. Just looked at me like she needed to know I was still in one piece." He was quiet for a moment. "You can't burn out when someone is checking on you in the dark." Eleanor looked back at the valley. Something was pressing at the back of her throat, not quite grief, not quite recognition, but something that shared a border with both. "I don't have anyone checking on me," she said. Her voice came out more plainly than she'd intended. "I know," he said, and somehow, from him, it wasn't pity. It was just true. 2 people on a mountain, naming what was real. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. The tears came, anyway, a few of them, brief and surprising. The kind she hadn't allowed in years because there had always been someone in the next room who would see. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't hand her anything. He just let the silence hold what it needed to hold. After a while, she breathed out and started the engine. "Show me a place to eat," she said. "I know a place." The second vote came 2 days later, on a Thursday morning that had started out clear and turned gray by 9. Eleanor had spent the intervening time meeting individually with 2 of the swing voters, presenting a restructured proposal that offered the Harmon Group a minority partnership position rather than full acquisition. Her attorney believed it was defensible. Constance Beaumont had listened for 40 minutes and asked careful questions. Gerald Holt had not returned her calls. At 10:17 a.m., the vote was called. 5 for, 4 against. 1 abstention, Constance, again, whose caution Eleanor had begun to read not as indecision but as a fundamental unwillingness to be the person who decided the outcome either way. 5 was not enough. The Harmon Group representative, a man named Bradford Cole, who wore the polished confidence of someone who had never doubted an outcome in his professional life, shook hands with 2 of the board members and began drafting terms with his attorney at the far end of the table. Eleanor gathered her materials. She did it slowly and deliberately, the way she had taught herself to do things when she was holding herself together by will. Outside, the sky had lowered further. Snow was coming, not hard yet, but inevitable. She stood at the top of the resort's exterior steps and looked at the parking lot and understood, with an unexpected clarity, that she had lost. Meridian Capital, as it had existed for 8 years, was finished. Daniel was parked where he always was. He had the engine running, which meant the heat was on. She walked to the car and got in and sat without speaking for a full minute. "They voted," she said. "Yeah." She looked at her hands in her lap. Outside, the first flakes were beginning to fall. "I built that company," she said. "Not in the sense that I worked hard at it. I mean, I made it from nothing. I chose every person we hired. I chose what we stood for. I chose what we wouldn't do even when it would have been easier to do it." She pressed her palms flat on her thighs. "And now Bradford Cole gets to put his name on it." Daniel was looking at the windshield. "You're still you," he said. She turned to look at him. "The company isn't you," he said. "What you built is still built. People you hired still have what they got from working there. The decisions you made are already in the world. Cole just gets the name on the door." It was not a complicated thought. She had heard variations of it before, from therapists and self-help books and well-meaning friends. But from him, in this car, on this afternoon, it landed differently, not as consolation, as fact. She nodded once. "Drive," she said. He drove. They didn't talk. The snow thickened around them, and the mountains disappeared into low gray cloud, and the silence between them was the warmest thing in the world. The town was called Harrow's Mill. It existed as a collection of gas stations and feed suppliers and 36 old houses arranged around a main street that the highway had bypassed sometime in the 1970s. The diner, Patsy's, according to a hand-painted sign above the door, smelled of burned coffee and pie crust, and decades of people stopping here because there was nowhere else to stop. They took a booth by the window. A woman of 60 or so brought menus and coffee without being asked, read the room with the accuracy of someone who had been reading Tired Travelers for 30 years, and left them alone. Eleanor looked out the window at the falling snow. A dog was sitting on the covered porch of the house across the street, watching the road with great seriousness. "Tell me something about her," Eleanor said. Daniel looked up from his menu. "Lily," she said. "Tell me something real." He set the menu down. A small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, the involuntary kind, the kind people produce when a memory arrives before they can prepare for it. "She built a snow laboratory last winter," he said. "In the backyard. She found a science kit at the library sale, one of those kids' activity boxes, and she got very serious about it. Spent 2 weeks collecting snow samples in little cups, labeled everything. Drew charts. What was she testing? Whether snow from different parts of the yard melted at different rates based on sun exposure." He paused. She was right, actually. The samples from under the maple took almost 40 minutes longer. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. She sounds like someone who doesn't accept what she's told. She accepts it. Eleanor laughed. It came out genuinely, without strategy, the first real laugh in what felt like days. "I was like that," she said. "My third-grade teacher told my mother I was exhausting. I bet you were." Their food arrived. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and the snow kept falling outside, and the dog across the street had been joined by a second dog, and the diner stayed warm. Somewhere in the middle of it, Daniel reached across the table for the sugar dispenser, and his hand passed close to hers and stayed there for a moment, and neither of them moved away. Later, much later, Eleanor would think about what she felt in that moment. Not excitement, exactly. Something quieter. The particular quality of realizing you have been alone so long that you had stopped noticing the shape of the absence, and then noticing it all at once. He leaned forward slightly. She didn't pull back. The kiss was brief and careful, the kind that asks a question rather than answers one. He pulled back and looked at her steadily. She looked at him. Outside, the snow fell without mercy or apology, indifferent to everything except the slow accumulation of itself. They left Harrow's Mill at first light on Friday, the day after the final vote. The road home was 280 miles of mountain descent followed by the long flat run across the Illinois plain. The snow had stopped overnight, and the sky had gone clear and brilliant, the kind of cold blue that only arrived after storms. Daniel drove this time. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat and watched the mountains shrink behind them in the mirror. They talked differently on the way home, not the careful exchanges of two people navigating something uncertain, but the looser conversation of people who have already decided something and are now figuring out what it means. She told him about the years before Meridian, working 70-hour weeks at a financial firm downtown, living in a studio apartment in Pilsen, eating cereal for dinner because cooking felt like a luxury she couldn't afford the time for. He told her about the years after Claire learning to grocery shop for a grieving 8-year-old who had strong opinions about which brand of macaroni was acceptable, learning to braid hair badly and then less badly, learning that bedtime stories were not optional and had never been optional and would not become optional regardless of how tired he was. "Do you miss her?" Eleanor asked. "Your wife?" He was quiet for a moment. "I miss the version of myself that existed when she was alive," he said. "The one who didn't know yet what he was capable of losing." A pause. "I love who Lily and I are now. But I can carry both things." The prairie came on gradually as the mountains fell away, flat and white and enormous, the kind of landscape that made you feel both small and necessary at the same time. "I don't know how to do this," Eleanor said. She was looking at the road ahead, not at him. "Do what?" "Whatever this is." She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "I've had relationships before, but they always felt like another kind of work. Something to optimize, to get right." "Maybe that was the problem," he said. She considered this. "If we do this," he said, choosing his words deliberately, "I'm not doing temporary. I have a daughter and a life that is very specifically organized around consistency. I can't do something that disappears after a month." She turned to look at him. "I'm not interested in temporary either," she said. He nodded, eyes on the road. "Then we go slow," he said. "And honest." "I can do slow," she said. "Honest might take practice." "I'll wait," he said simply. They drove the last 60 miles to Chicago in the kind of quiet that had nothing uncomfortable in it. The penthouse was on the 43rd floor of a glass tower in the River North neighborhood. Eleanor had purchased it 4 years ago as an investment in the certainty of her own success. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen she rarely used, a view of the lake that she had stopped seeing because she looked at it every day. She walked in at 6 in the evening and stood in the entry with her bag and her coat and looked at the space that had always told her she had arrived, and felt, for the first time, how cold it was. Not the temperature, the quality of it. The way a space feels when no one has been in it for 3 days and no one was expected back. She set her bag down and walked to the windows. The lake was gray and restless, the ice shelf along the shore breaking into shifting plates. The city glittered below her. She had worked for all of this, and she had gotten it, and she was standing in it at 6 in the evening after losing the thing she had worked for. And she did not know what the next chapter of her life was supposed to look like. Her phone buzzed. Her assistant, forwarding the first of what would be many messages. Meridian Capital had begun notifying staff of restructuring plans. 400 positions would be eliminated over 60 days as the Harmon Group consolidated the company into its existing portfolio. 400 people. Eleanor sat down on the couch and read the message again. She had hired many of them personally. She knew the names of their children. She had written reference letters and attended weddings and remembered who was allergic to shellfish when they ordered catering for team meetings. They had trusted the company, which meant they had trusted her with the structure of their professional lives. She picked up her phone and called her attorney. "I want to set up severance negotiations," she said. "Individual, not blanket. And I want to establish a career transition fund, private, not corporate. Out of my own holdings. Eleanor, you've just lost a significant—" "I know what I've lost," she said. "I'm asking what it will cost to do this correctly." She wrote numbers until 11 p.m. At 11:15, her phone buzzed again. A text from a number she had saved that afternoon under his name. "Daniel. Lily wants to know if the lady from the mountains is real or if I made her up." Eleanor stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Tell her I'm real. Working on being worth the introduction." His reply came after a few minutes. "She says that's a good answer." Eleanor set the phone face down on the coffee table and, for the first time in weeks, went to bed before midnight. The text arrived on a Tuesday. "Lily has a game Saturday. Outdoor, snow's supposed to be light. No pressure. But she asked me to ask." Eleanor rearranged 2 meetings. She did not mention to anyone where she was going on Saturday morning. The field was in a park in Logan Square. The kind of park that existed in working neighborhoods, no amenities, just grass and chain link and parents in parkas holding paper cups of hot cocoa from the concession stand. The snow was, as predicted, light, a thin dusting over the turf, enough to show where players had already run. Eleanor arrived as warm-ups were ending. She spotted Daniel near the sideline, standing with a cluster of other parents, wearing a canvas jacket that seemed inadequate for the temperature. He saw her and raised his chin in acknowledgement, understated, unhurried, the same quality he brought to everything. She walked over and stood beside him. "She knows you're here?" Eleanor asked. "I told her this morning." She went back to eating her cereal. That's basically enthusiasm from Lily. The game began. Lily played midfield. She was quick and economical, not flashy, the kind of player who seemed to be thinking 2 steps ahead. Her team was losing by 1 with 4 minutes left when she received a pass at the edge of the box, took 1 touch to settle it, and struck it cleanly into the low corner. The goalkeeper didn't move. The sideline erupted. Parents cheered. 2 of Lily's teammates sprinted over and launched themselves at her. She weathered the collision with the contained expression of someone who had been hoping for this outcome and was mildly satisfied to have achieved it. Daniel exhaled beside Eleanor. 1 long, slow breath. She looked at his face in that moment, the particular light that moved through it. Not pride in the performed sense, something more internal. A man watching his daughter exist in the world and finding it sufficient. Eleanor felt something she could not immediately name. It arrived slowly, the way warmth arrives in a room after you've turned up the heat first at the edges, then everywhere. She had been in boardrooms when deals closed, and she had felt the sharp satisfaction of that. She had stood at the closing of acquisitions and felt the click of a thing correctly completed. This was not that. This was quieter and more disorienting because she didn't have a category for it. Family was the word that eventually came to her, which was not a word she had applied to herself in this sense since she was very young. After the game, Lily approached them with the careful measurement of a child who had been observing from a distance and was now conducting a closer assessment. She was small for her age, with her father's dark eyes and the air of someone who formed opinions based on evidence. She looked at Eleanor. "Dad said you drive through blizzards," Lily said. "Once," Eleanor said. "Your father drove. I just stayed awake. He says you're smart. He's generous." Lily considered this. "He's not usually generous," she said. "He's accurate." She looked at her father briefly, then back at Eleanor. "Do you like hot cocoa?" "Very much," Eleanor said. "They sell it over there," Lily said, gesturing toward the concession stand. "It's not very good, but it's hot. The most important attribute. Eleanor agreed. Lily nodded, satisfied, and led the way. The Career Transition Fund took 6 weeks to structure. Eleanor worked with 2 employment attorneys and an outplacement firm to create individualized packages for the displaced Meridian employees, severance extensions, resume and interview coaching, direct introductions to hiring managers at companies she had cultivated relationships with over 15 years of operating in the Chicago financial sector. By the end of the 6th week, 81 of the 400 had confirmed new positions. It was not enough. She knew it wasn't enough, but it was what she could do with what she had. And she had learned, somewhere on a mountain in a snowstorm, that doing what you could with what you had was not a diminished form of success. She had also, quietly, begun interviewing for her next role. Not as a CEO, she was not ready for that yet, and she had become suspicious of her own readiness for things. Something smaller, a turnaround advisory position at a mid-sized firm, work that would let her use what she knew without requiring her to be the person at the center of everything. She had 2 offers by the end of February. The dinner was Daniel's idea. A proper one, he said, not a truck stop or a mountain diner or takeout eaten over a laptop. He had made a reservation at a restaurant in the West Loop that had cloth napkins and a wine list and required you to plan ahead. Eleanor arrived on time. She was wearing the same cashmere coat she'd worn to the parking garage 6 weeks earlier, which felt like a kind of honesty about where this had all started. He was already there. He stood when she came in, which she had not expected, and she registered the small deliberateness of it. They ordered. They talked. It was easier than it had any right to be 2 people who had already seen each other in the worst parts of their respective winters, which made everything else feel navigable by comparison. At the end of the meal, over coffee, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and turned it toward her. Lily's text read, "Dad smiles more now." Eleanor read it twice. She looked up at Daniel, who was watching her with the steady patience that had characterized him from the beginning. "She's going to be an attorney," Eleanor said. "Or a research scientist," he said. "She's still deciding." Eleanor picked up her own phone and typed a response to her own number, something she could carry out with her. "Tell her it's because of the blizzard lady, and because of him, and because of a snow laboratory and a gap-toothed photograph on a sun visor." She didn't send it. She just kept it on the screen for a moment, then set the phone down. Outside the restaurant windows, snow was falling again, gentler now than it had been in February. The kind that came in late winter when the cold was almost finished and didn't know it yet. It fell on the sidewalks and the parked cars and the narrow streets of the West Loop and dissolved when it touched the warm glass. 3 days later, on a Sunday afternoon when the sky was the pale gray blue of winter releasing its grip, Eleanor drove herself to a house in Pilsen where a small backyard held a dormant maple tree and the compressed evidence of a snow laboratory that had operated last February and would, given the chance, operate again. Lily opened the back door before Eleanor knocked. "We're doing the experiment again," Lily said, without preamble. "The variables are different this year because we got more snow on the north side. Do you know anything about controlled variables?" "Some," Eleanor said. "Good," Lily said. "You can help with the recording." Daniel appeared in the doorway behind his daughter, a mug in his hand, a quiet expression on his face. Eleanor stepped into the backyard. The snow was cold and clean beneath her boots. The maple was still bare, its branches holding nothing yet. Lily had already arranged her sample cups in a grid, 8 of them, labeled in careful handwriting, positioned at precise intervals across the yard. Eleanor crouched in the snow beside the first cup and looked at the label. She read it. She looked up at Lily. "North corner, morning shade," she said. "Correct," Lily said, with the satisfaction of someone whose hypothesis was already being confirmed. Eleanor looked at the yard, and the bare tree, and the sample cups full of packed snow, and the kitchen window where Daniel had moved to watch them through the glass, his coffee still in his hand, his face carrying the expression she had first seen on a mountain sideline, that internal, sufficient light. She was no longer the CEO of anything. She was crouched in a snowy backyard in Pilsen, holding a clipboard for a 9-year-old scientist. And she realized, never felt less lost. The snow began to melt in the cups, slowly, at different rates, exactly as the experiment required. She started writing down the numbers.